Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Twitter space today. I'm your host, Jacki Ochao, the in-country coordinator for the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. And today we'll be talking about border borders. And this is part of what we're doing to celebrate the World Day of Remembrance, which is on 20th of November. That's this Sunday. So as we remember the victims of road crashes, today I want us to speak more about border borders. And with me today, I have Peter Tibigambwa, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Safeway Rightway. I know I can't speak so much to introduce Peter, so I'll give Peter a few minutes to introduce himself, and then we can get right deep into our discussion. So Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacki. And thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Peter Tibigambwa, as Jacki has said. I work with Safeway Rightway, which is an organization, non-government organization in Uganda that's established to promote road safety, bring together private sector corporations and government or public institutions in a bid to promote safety. Our model is that we try and encourage private sector members to pull together resources, also work with development agencies such as GAI and the others that we work with, and have a louder voice towards promoting road safety. Been doing this for just under 10 years now, and worked on policy issues, border issues, as we'll be talking about today. But also in the same light, recognizing that as CSOs or non-government organizations, we speak loudest when we are together. So also members of the Road Safety Coalition for Uganda, which is a body that brings together institutions that are seeking to promote road safety. And I'm honored to represent both organizations here today. Over to you, Jacki.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. And just to mention that we have some of the members of the coalition that Peter did talk about. That's the Road Safety Advocacy Coalition Uganda, ROSACO. We have some of them listening in. Welcome and thanks for joining our space. So just to get into our discussion today, I know some people may not know what border borders are. A bit of an introduction or a background to this border issue. Now, the whole border thing came, I think, stretches way back from as early as the 1960s. And these were bicycle taxi services that were operating between the borders of Uganda and Kenya, mainly in a place called Busia. Now, these were known for partly smuggling coffee, but also they were used as taxi services to transfer, passengers from one side of the border to the other. People coming from Kenya going into Uganda and vice versa, because there's a bit of a distance in between the two border points. Now, being the taxi services before we knew it, they spread to all parts of the country, still mainly as bicycle taxi services. And then later in the early 90s or late 80s, some of them, upgraded to become the motorcycles that we have right now. A number of them, of course, were still being used to transfer, passengers from one point to another. And this time round, we were able to go to even further locations, unlike for the bicycles. So little by little, the borders have become one major, transport mode in the country. And so today we get to talk about them. As I did mention earlier on, we looking towards celebrating the World Day of Remembrance on Sunday, remembering people. And unfortunate for us is that these borders that have become one of the major leading transport modes in the country have also become one of the major causes of fatalities and injuries on the road. So we will go more into this. And as we get to the discussion, I would like to invite Peter to give us a little bit, background and how we found ourselves as a country getting into this border situation. Peter, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacki, for the background to how I think to recognize that the word border came to be the identity that is associated with motorcycles and motorcycles as passenger service vehicles in Uganda. As Jacki has rightly stated, they were the option that was available at the border, and that's how we got to kind of take on this service as a country. It meant that no one was prepared for it. The standard of what everyone saw as public transport was mainly to do with what vehicles provided, what buses provided, or commuter taxis for 14-seater. For those of us who don't know, those in Uganda were. It also meant that the transport sector, the public institutions were not that they were not interested, but they were not prepared for what was going to come. And my personal opinion, and I think some research papers have picked up the same, is that it kind of grew out of nowhere. It meant that policies, government laws were playing catch up to what borders were doing in the country. It meant that when the regulation is coming up, there is already an operation that's in place, which happens in most cases. But the rate at which borders have also grown has meant that it's almost difficult, or it was almost difficult for the government and policymakers to catch up when it came to regulating, to managing, and to enforcement in the border sector. That also had knock-on impact when it comes to who gets into the sector. A key point to note is that borders are kind of were seen as one of the quickest ways to get into making some money for those who are the riders, but they are also the quickest way that you move in cities or in towns where the transport system is not as reliable. So it's meant that it's got us into a space that we are. It's a worrying space, or a space that is being talked about very frequently. It's a space where disorganization and the sector will almost move hand in hand all the time, and it's also a space where, because of its growth, people have as Ugandans, I think we have kind of stigmatized the sector. We've seen it as a sector for a certain type of person of standing, highly associated with illiteracy or school dropouts, which is not the case because there's a number of graduates in there. But because of the stigma and all, it means that the people in the sector also have accepted that as their identity, which means that then the riders are also moving to say, well, everyone sees me as the bad guy. Why not be the bad guy? And try to not stick to what is right, but stick to what community is seeing me as. Also meaning that, again, safety is not prioritized. What is prioritized is how do I make the next shilling or dollar, or the next mode of currency. For those of us who are not familiar with the currency in Uganda. So yeah, Jacki, that's how I see it, and that's how I see that we've gotten ourselves here, and we are in a position where we have to do something about it at individual level, at policy level, and at community level.
Thank you very much, Peter. I was recently reading one of the police reports stretching from way back as 2008. And I saw that in 2008, there were a total number of 1,964 border related crashes that were reported in the month, just 1 month. in Kampala alone. So meaning this is not something that kind of like erupted overnight. So my question to you is, how did we find ourselves in such a situation? Because if as far back as 2008, we were having in just 1 month over 2,000 motorcycle related or border related crashes. And here we are today in 2022. And the statistics from the 2021 report say that 34% of all the fatalities that were recorded related to the road, 34% of these were again border. So right now they are the leading cause. How did we get ourselves to this, looking at it both from the policy angle, but also from the everyday user?
Question, Jacki. In my opinion, there are quite a number of reasons that we've gotten to where we are today. Going back to the, I don't know, we could say founding principles, or the birth, is the best way to put it, the birth of the border sector was not planned for. It's meant that it also became a passenger service that was not planned for. It's meant that we kept progressing as a country, as a nation, when it comes to infrastructure. To start there, we developed infrastructure, and we have continued to develop infrastructure, which is looking at the vehicles that we expected to be with us in the country. We do not see them as they've grown today. We do not see it as a passenger service mode of transport. It's meant that the engineers or the infrastructure development sector was developing infrastructure that was meant for a certain type of vehicle, which did not put into consideration the borders. It also meant that it means that the borders are competing for the same space with the vehicles that the infrastructure development has put in place, infrastructure development departments. If you look at a two-wheeler and a four-wheeler, if there is a competition at all on the road, there's only one vehicle that is going to win, and it's going to be the four-wheeler vehicle. So that speaks to the number of crashes that we are seeing growing, and that have been growing since 2008. So we have infrastructure that is catering for one set and enforcement, and at different levels. We know that the sector is growing. There are no measures in terms of, because we are a growing economy, that's a given. It means that there is more vehicles on the road, and that's on both sets. The statistics you're talking about, again, for crashes, you also have to look at the statistics of the fleet, or the number of motor vehicles that we have in the country. I think in the National Development Plan 2 or 3, it's the UBO statistics indicate that we grew, the motor vehicle fleet grew by 50%, or doubled between over a 5-year span. That was 2013, I think, to 2018. Motorcycle fleet tripled from 2010 to 2018. So again, infrastructure is the same. Some improvements, but not at the same pace as the growth of the fleet, and that happens across the globe. But also, that's the fleet that I'm referring to, the four-wheeler fleet. That infrastructure has to also accommodate the motorcycles. Competition continues to happen on the roads. And I think the other point to add to that is when it comes to safety gear for border and the practice and how much we use safety gear in Uganda. It's very minimal. It doesn't speak to the number of crashes, but it speaks to the fatalities, and I'm sure you'll get to that later. So you see that there is a sector that's growing. It's a sector that's not prioritizing its safety, but it's also a sector that is within a space that it's not generally been planned for as we have planned for the other motor vehicles. So it's these developments where you have a sector that is growing faster than anything that we are putting into place to accommodate it, which is resulting into fighting for space. And you're fighting for space, or the motorcycle, the boda riders are fighting for space that is not for them. Hence, the increase in the number of crashes and fatalities that are associated with bodas, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. You actually bring in a very interesting perspective, and that's the issue of, the increased number of fleets, or the number of motorbikes, bicycles that we have on the road right now. And just, thinking about how we move forward from this. You've been in a number of discussions with, different stakeholders. And what I know for a fact is there's been talk, especially from the border riders, in terms of their different lanes, all kinds of suggestions. How or what do you think are some of the measures that should be put in place to deal with this? For instance, is the issue of a separate lane something that we look at as a way to curb these fatalities and injuries? Would be good to hear what your thoughts are on this.
It's true, and I think when I started off, I mentioned the fact that it's become a very dominant discussion in transport planning, in road safety circles. What are the solutions? A number of sectors that are concerned with transport planning, and of course the ministry, road infrastructure development, Uganda National Roads Authority. You will hear, and most of us here who are from Uganda have had engineers talking about the concept of forgiving roads, thinking about roads that are established to provide facilities, or in a manner that if there is a crash, your life is not at the highest risk, or you're not at the highest risk to lose your life. And I believe the conversation has to go that way. But that also feeds into the planning conversation. There's a question that we have to ask ourselves, which is how much can we accommodate within the space that we have as a nation and the rate at which we are growing. There's a lot of developments that have happened around the roads that we already have, and there's a question of how much can we do to extend those roads, to create space that that will accommodate the borders. If we are talking about border lanes, is it economically viable? And in some cases, it definitely will not be viable. And where it's not viable, then the question becomes, do we need, what is the solution? How can we move away from using borders in that area? And what are the other modes of transport that we can look at? So the conversation around how do we accommodate them cannot be had independent of the conversation around multimodal transport system. We at the moment we have a single mode of transport in Uganda. It's all by road. The facilities, the infrastructure available, if you want it to work, is very difficult. And some of the distances are walkable within the city. We are talking about Kampala as of now. And that conversation has to move beyond the now and to look into the 5 years from now, the 10 years from now, and the 15 years from now, looking at the city of Kampala, where the biggest problems are, and looking at the other cities that are growing, so that we avoid the mistakes that we have had in Kampala. So there is the solution around the lanes, but the lanes and the motorcycle dedicated lanes are not going to work everywhere. And where they cannot work, we have to think as a nation, what's the solution? What are the modes? What are the solutions can we take on to continue to enable people to move? Because just saying no more borders in the city is not a solution on its own. People have to travel to work, And even if we say that and we don't have an alternative, we shall continue to coexist. The border borders will stay. So that conversation around how do we enable people to travel from A to B with or without border borders it has to have a 360 outlook to it. On that front, where it's still possible, we know that border borders are here to stay. So we have to facilitate their movement as well, as we look at urban development. And then I think finally it goes back, and I think I've talked about that earlier. It goes back to the planning question. How much can we have within the spaces available to us? And if there's enough, of course, there's a census that was ongoing recently, and the question around that was how many border borders actually come from the city, because it's clear a number of people ride over 60 kilometers to come to the city to work and then get out. So the last piece I would add to that is, what are the other employment solutions that the people that are looking at the border sector as the source of employment can actually take on? So the infrastructure development, road construction has to put into consideration the fleet that we have in place, the feasibility of having people moving in. I think there are developments with the and discussions around a bus rapid transport system that has to continue, because that could be the solution to people traveling in. But the last 1 mile of how do I connect from where the bus will leave me to my home will probably remain to the border, because it will remain quicker. And at that point, we have to think about how do we accommodate them in a safe manner, where they have a dedicated lane, where they move safely as well. And I think if we can have all these, we can have the conversations, we can plan for all these issues together, then we'll find the solutions. And lastly, again, ping to that is the collaboration and coordination across the different bodies is paramount. Physical planning, road infrastructure planning, all these institutions that have an element to do with planning for cities have to speak to each other. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to find a solution that will work for the long term and works for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. You bring in a very interesting bit. Borders are here to stay. I mean, there are people who cannot live without borders. They have to go to work with borders, have to send their children to school with borders. So it's become a part of us. Now, research shows that motorcycle helmets, if correctly used, can reduce the risk of fatality by up to 42%. And that's a big number, because right now we're talking about, yes, borders are here to stay. But at the same time, we see the fatality rates going higher and higher. Injuries are so many. So we have to find a way of, addressing these issues. You talked about, infrastructure. That to me is a little bit long term, because some of the, roads and the streets have already been designed. Changing them to, suiting that might take a bit of time and a lot of resources. So for me, one of the most immediate ways of dealing with this is the correct use of helmets. Safeway Rightway recently conducted a study that was launched about a month or two ago on the use of helmets. I think it would be very nice if you shared with all our listeners what your findings are. What are some of the recommendations that we have coming with the use of helmets, and how we can reduce the risk of fatalities by up to 42% if they're correctly used?
Thanks, Jacki. As earlier on, I think you talked about the World Day of Remembrance, where we'll be remembering and praying for the souls of those that have perished in road crashes. It is evidence-based. It's not you can't challenge it, that if you have a helmet on, the chances of being involved in a crash and surviving the crash are much higher than if you do not have it on. I will, if you'll allow me, I'll try to not stick to the statistics, but to talk about these issues in the most simplistic manner, as they would be. The research is available on the Safeway Rightway website. All the Road Safety Coalition members also have it on their website, so I'd encourage anyone interested in this area to pick up the research. But to speak to that, just two quick examples, and not from a long time ago. Someone I know, family friend, involved in a crash at traffic lights. Lights go green, he tries to go through. Another car is trying to beat the red light. He literally is hit head on, and he flies off the bike, lands on his head. Very minor injuries to his nose and his lips. His head is intact. Without the helmet, totally different story. And it's there are different perspectives around people saying, well, a helmet is hot, a helmet is heavy, we live in a hot country. Most of these are just myths. It's not true. Nothing is more valuable than knowing that you have you number one, your life is safer if you have the helmet, and number two, your facial features are intact as well. I think we all like to look in a mirror and smile and laugh and talk. Without a helmet, there are some harder stories to tell. Even here, if you know anyone who's been involved in that and they survived, and they didn't have a helmet, their lives are totally different. They you and the medical staff will also find it very difficult to even save the life in that case. So I think the conversation around the importance or doing away with the helmet, to be honest, we've got to move past it and accept that anyone on a motorcycle should have a helmet. Going back to our findings, there are some interesting observations which are to do with not just the perceptions, but to do with the types and how people also, as we tend to not use the helmet or have the helmet, at least in Uganda. You have riders who will carry the helmet. They are, because they know that if there is a traffic police officer is going to stop them, so when they sense that it's somewhere ahead, they'll pick it up and put it on. And that I find very disturbing, because it's not about the traffic officer, it's not about the law, it's about life. And the conversation has to start from there. You say, we send our children in this country to school on motorcycles, no helmets. We are putting the life of a child in the hands of a rider who in most cases will actually have his helmet. But your child, you want to see the child go to school, come back to you. In the unwanted situation where there's a crash, you want to know that the child can actually survive the crash as well. So let's push and see that people wear helmets. Of course, the safety features to do with, or what needs to be done, we are just getting started. I think as a country, we've not done as much when it comes to even awareness of people knowing the importance of all this. But our behaviors are also quite problematic. In the research, we also found that there's a significant number of riders who actually, of course, from the Safe Border Hailing app, who will have a helmet, and they will offer the helmet to the rider, and the rider will literally say, no, I do not want the helmet because it's uncomfortable, even when they have the nets. So for hygiene issues, of course, we had COVID and all, but you have people who are not interested in the helmet at all, even when it's offered. And I think we have to look at changing that from the onset. Everyone should know that the helmet is not about the law. Yes, it is about the laws provide that you should wear the helmet, but that's not where the thinking should start. It should start from I leave my house and I want to come back home safe. And I believe everyone who leaves their household, they want to come back to their family. You want to come back to your family. So it should be, and to come back to your family, you have higher chances if you're going to use a motorcycle that you will come back, or if you don't come back and end up in hospital and you had the helmet on, chances of survival are much higher. And the conversation has to be about that. So sorry to avoid the discussion around the statistics and all, but I just think it's important that we stress the fact that it's about your safety. You cannot delegate it to a rider, to an enforcement officer. It's about you, and wear that helmet.
Thank you very much again, Peter. I mean, you brought in an issue that reminded me of what's going on in the country right now with the enforcement, as more stringent enforcement by the police. That, I mean, the whole city is painted with brilliant, bright colors for reflector jackets and helmets and all that. But I think the message still hasn't reached home because. Like you rightly said, most of these borders will wear the helmet because they don't want to be arrested. Would be keen to know, as a coalition and as Safeway Rightway, what are some of those things that you're doing to ensure, just like you said, that people take it upon themselves, both riders and passengers, because as it is right now, most of the people who are actually wearing these helmets, probably 90% or so, are the riders, not the passengers. So how do we reach out to those riders, but also passengers? What are some of the things that members of the coalition, as well as Safeway Rightway, being a part of the coalition, is doing to address this issue?
Good question, Jacki. We yeah, like you've said, we're not sleeping on the job, and we appreciate the recent developments with enforcement bodies. Research shows that enforcement on its own does not usually lead to great and quick turnaround when it comes to behavior change and response to road safety and adherence to regulations. Because inherently, as human beings, of wanting to break the law, if I might use that. But so we have an element of wanting to go against what someone else is asking you to do. As the coalition, we at the moment, the enforcement bodies, when it comes to training and sensitization, that started with the research that we did. There are recommendations from that we are adopting moving forward. We are particularly interested in creating capacity within the rider sector, ensuring that we start to push for self-regulation. So start with the individual, but also most riders belong to associations, to see that members within associations start to push each other, push the message down, train each other, and appreciate that their lives matter, that their families matter, that they ought to do the right thing. They ought to use the helmet. They ought to have the reflector jackets. They ought to keep their headlamps on, and all these sorts of things. So that's at one level, building internal capacity within the rider community. We also appreciate that regulation, legislation is important. We've been working again with the coalition members, directly with the Minister of Works and Transport, when it comes to looking at the regulations for motorcycle and tricycle riders in the country. There were some gaps in there. What happens if a passenger does not have a helmet on, for example? That's something that was ambiguous in the law. That's been addressed now. There are a few other things that have been addressed in the law as well. And then lastly, which is a bit of not controversial, but not well-known fact in Uganda, is around the standard that you could actually have a helmet on, which is not entirely keeping you safe. So again, working with the Bureau of Standards in Uganda to see that we have a Uganda standard that promotes and ensures that the helmets that are coming in the country are truly safe helmets. We've just gone past the point of reviewing and updating the regulations and the standard, and our commitment is to continue to stand with the government bodies and appreciate that there's a different perspective of the public, of riders and passengers, when government is coming up with laws and regulations, and when it comes to the perspective towards CSOs around trying to drive the message home around your own safety, behavior change, and the like. So our commitment is, it's not just that we want to have the policies in place, we want to popularize those policies once they are here. We want to work with helmet distributors, with manufacturers, and to see that we are protecting the rider, we are protecting the passenger, but the passenger also appreciates why we are trying to see that they are protected and they are safer. So these are some of the pieces we are working on, different institutions in different spaces, different specialities as well. And we believe this is mainly the inspiration for us to start the coalition. It's not yet a year old, but we see great traction. A lot more institutions are coming up and want to join us on this journey, and we don't see it stopping here. We see ourselves doing this for the longer term, and tackling different and bigger issues, having a 360 outlook on the issue of rider safety, passenger safety, and road safety as a whole as well.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I mean, the work that the coalition, together with Safeway Rightway, is doing is great and highly commendable. I will open this up for anybody who wants to either make quick remarks or to ask a question to our host, Peter, to request, and then you'll be allowed to speak. Anybody wants to say anything or wants to ask any questions? Okay, if there isn't any, yes, I would say a very big thank you to all of us for joining in. Yes, border borders are here to stay, not going anywhere anytime soon, but we have to find ways of ensuring that we reduce the fatalities and the injuries that are being caused by border borders to, a very low level. I mean, as much as we can, ensuring that we are all safe. Our children who go to school with border borders are safe. People who go to work with border borders are safe. So a very big thank you for joining, and have a good rest of the day and evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.